Peggle. Hello and welcome to the top 10 video games of 2024. My favorite thing to do every year, count down my top 10 video games from the past year. 2024 had no shortage of good games. Plenty of them I played. I also played a lot of the bad ones this year as well. But I had a lot of fun with a lot of games this year, so it was pretty difficult to narrow it down to just 10. Some people might say, Yemmy, do a top 15. Last time I did that, I didn't really agree with my bottom 5 out of the 15 afterwards. So, we're not doing that ever again. But the top 10, I've solidified my top 10. They are always my top 10, and they probably will never change. But thank you for joining me for this past year of podcasts and streaming. We have a lot of ground to cover here, so I want to make this intro a little bit faster. But thank you for joining if you're here for the Twitch live reaction. Appreciate you being here. Hello. And also, appreciate you tuning in to this episode of the Fair 64 podcast. Let's go ahead and get started with some honorable mentions that I want to just fire off real quickly, maybe give a few thoughts. These are games that I enjoyed this past year, but they just didn't make the list. First up, Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown. A very fun Metroidvania, enjoyed the art style, was pretty impressed with it all around, was a very fun time, a solid 4 out of 5 game. Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree. I'm still a bit wary about putting a full-blown DLC onto my top 10 list. This one got close simply because it was very good. I did have a couple of problems with it, though. I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 as well. But I still had a great time with it. I liked the new areas to explore, the new bosses, the new enemies. But there was a lot of copy and pasting being done for the main game, which I expected. But it got a bit egregious towards the end. Other than that, I said a couple times throughout the past couple months here after the whole, Game Awards nominating it, that I would be not putting it on my list simply because this DLC cannot be played without the base game of Elden Ring. So, that's the main reason why I wouldn't put it onto this list. Maybe Night Rain next year because that is a standalone experience, but Shadow of the Erdtree, can't do it. Not my thing. Well, not my thing to put it on this list. Banisher's Ghosts of New Eden. One of the first longer games that I played and finished in 2024. Very good, kind of God of War 2018 inspired game where you play as two halves, the human and the ghost side. I thought it was good for what it was. I did give it a pretty high score, but it just didn't make the list. Just didn't make the cut, And that's just how it goes sometimes. Also, a game called Flock, which I played on Xbox Game Pass. This is a game where you gather multiple animals using songs and have them fly around with you, or float around with you, I guess. It was a fun, chill time, just didn't make the list. And finally, for the shoutouts, we got Mullet Mad Jack, which was a very fun, intense first-person shooter, a hallway shooter. You barge through a door, and you kill a bunch of enemies to keep your life gauge up, and then you go to the next one. Pretty good roguelike elements in there, but it wasn't really too roguelitey and that, you had to restart every single time you went through it. I got through it pretty fast, even though there was some harder stuff in there, but really fun art style, really fast-paced gameplay. Just barely missed the list. Probably would be number 11 on there. Speaking of the list, let's get to the first one on here, which is number 10. That's right. Coming in at number 10 is Rusty's Retirement, which I could be playing right now. You'll never know I play it every time I stream, but it was a game that I played a long, long time. Right now, as of the day that I'm recording this, I have 546 hours in this game, and that's because it is just a chill game that sits on your desktop, and Rusty and his friends tend to the farms, harvest biofuel, and repeat. They recently added an update that added animals like chickens, dogs, and cats, as well as a couple new plants and a new upgrade system, which was very nice. Also, a new map, a snow map. But essentially, the basics are that you start a farm with like a 6x6 crop tile. You grow wheat, then you can upgrade and grow turnips and carrots and pumpkins, etc., etc. And Rusty, who is a character who it's a very nicely designed character, Rusty, in his retirement. He harvests those things for you, brings them back to the supply shed, and then eventually he'll mosey on over to the biofuel converter to make money for the game and repeat. You also need to water the crops, and you can fertilize them eventually. And you can also add more robots to help out. So you can add a watering bot or a bot that picks up the plants, or you can add a bot that takes the plants from the supply shed to the biofuel converter for our friend there. Once you get cows and pigs and whatnot, you can take their poop and you can make it into fertilizer, which helps the plants grow faster and gives them special properties sometimes, like making them huge. It was a very chill time. I immediately fell in love with it, and it was one of those games where once you got your setup going, you could just kind of let it go for like a day or so, then come back and check out how it's going and replant things or add things to your farm. And it's a nice little game that sits at the bottom of your desktop or on the side, depending on how you want to play, or you can even integrate it for streams to add it to your stream and have people join you and plant crops with you and stuff like that. So it's just a very fun community type game, very chill, very enjoyable, a lot of fun. If you haven't picked it up yet, it's like $5. It's got so much content. It's got a sizable chunk of my time this year, and that's why it's number 10 on this list. Because and you might be saying, well, Yemmy, why don't you put it higher? Yeah, it's because it doesn't really have much going on. It is still, like, even though it's a 5 out of 5 type game for me, it doesn't have, like, there's not a lot of interaction with it. Like, yeah, you plant seeds here or there, or you build something here or there. But for the most part, it's really just kind of like it plays itself kind of game, which I don't mind at all. Actually, this is like a first for me to really dive into one of these types of games. And I really enjoyed my time, but not enough to put it higher than anything else that's on this list currently. Speaking of which, let's get to number 9. Number 9 is Arctic Eggs, and this was a very interesting game where you fry eggs in like this neo sci-fi distant future kind of world where everyone lives in the Arctic in like this base, and in order to survive, one person becomes the chef who cooks eggs for everybody. Everyone gets at least 1 or 2 eggs. And so you go to each person. Sometimes they have a wild request for you, like, hey, while you're frying my egg, can you please also fry this cockroach, or make sure this cockroach doesn't exit the frying pan? Or maybe they'll ask you to balance a glass of water or a beer in your frying pan while you're trying to fry these eggs. The main question of the game is, can you fry an egg on Mount Everest? I guess you gotta finish the game to find out. But I really enjoyed how this game started off pretty easy, saying, "Hey, here's an egg, fry it in the pan. You gotta flip it over once and fry it for enough time that it becomes a fried egg, an over easy egg, as they would call it around here." And they just kind of kept adding things onto it, like, hey, make sure you fry this egg before the cigarette that's in the frying pan burns out. Make sure you keep this cockroach or these two cockroaches in the pan while you're frying these eggs, or you fail. Make sure you balance this glass of water. Make sure you fry this fish with the egg, and the fish is like huge, and it makes it hard to flip things around. There's different difficulty levels to it as well, so you can have the pan be like a normal frying pan, or you can just have a flat surface and try that on for size. It's not easy, let me tell you that much. You have some grip types that you can use: a high grip, a low grip, a medium grip, a loose grip, a tight grip. All the things you might need for your frying needs. This game has also a very interesting art style. It's like a PS1 inspired kind of art style, much like other games that came out this year. As I mentioned throughout the time that I had played Mouthwashing, I think that Arctic Eggs gripped me a bit more, and it caught my attention a bit more than that game. And then they do have a very similar art style. They got a kind of a similar creepy atmosphere to them. But Arctic Eggs just kind of rose over the top. It fried over Mouthwashing for me personally, simply because the gameplay was just so interesting and unique. Just frying an egg and other things, of course. And the challenge got pretty difficult by the end. By the end, you're grilling like several eggs at the same time, like 6 eggs at the same time, trying to flip those around. It didn't get to a point of like frustration, but it did. It was a bit of a challenge, but the payoff was very nice. And I know this is a game that not a lot of people are probably going to be putting on a top 10 list this year, but for me personally, I do gravitate towards those more unique, off-the-wall experiences, and Arctic Eggs was right up my alley for this year. And maybe it could be up your alley too. Try it out. I think that you might like it, especially if you like the more off-the-wall stuff. And as for this one, I'm giving it 4 fried eggs out of 5. Let's move on to number 8. That's right. Number 8 is Yellow Taxi Goes Vroom. This was one of the first games that I fell in love with this year. It was an instant 5. Well, not instant, but it was a pretty quick 5 out of 5 for me. It's another one that's got a fun art style to it. Kind of reminds you of like the Dreamcast or something like that. And it has a very unique play style as well, because you're playing as a yellow taxi that can't jump. You can stall out and do kind of like backflips, but you can't jump normally. You can go really fast and go off of jumps. You can drive around and interact with things and maybe bounce off of them and jump. But the main way to jump is to do like the stall out move, which is a little bit it's a little bit interesting to get going. And especially when you get to the part where you learn how to do double stall outs and stuff like that, it just really adds on to itself. This is a platformer, quote unquote platformer, where you collect various things, and much like Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie, there's the main thing that you want to get, of course, and that allows you to enter into the next world, or move on through the level. The nice thing about the game is it's easy to pick up. It's not too difficult to master. It really does ease you into it, and by the time that you get to the final level, you're going to be a pro at it. I found this game to be very satisfying. The soundtrack was immaculate. The graphical style was beautiful, and it was a very funny game as well. There was plenty of comedy mixed in with it as well. One of the main characters in the game looks very close to a 3D rendered Mario type character. I believe he's called Morio, if I remember correctly. So they're kind of like being cheeky about that. But the main premise is drive around as this taxi. You can't jump, and you got to collect the things. And I just found myself falling in love with this game instantly. It's just got such a unique play style. It's got a kind of a bit of an off-putting soundtrack to it. It's got so many different levels in there, so it had lots of unique level design, and the open world, like hub world, is also pretty fun to adventure around as well. If you haven't tried out Yellow Taxi Goes Vroom, now's the time. It's very fun. I do hope that they bring it to more platforms than just Steam in the future. I think this would be a great game to put onto the Switch or the Switch successor, and I think a lot of people would fall in love with it too. As for me, I knew that this was going on the top 10 list as soon as I rolled those credits, and I hope you did too. Let's move on to number 7. Parking Garage Rally Circuit was a deep cut this year. It showed up on my Steam new and trending, and as soon as I saw the graphic style, which is once again a Genesis or Dreamcast inspired graphic style, I knew that I had to try this one out. It's a bit of a unique game for my top 10 list, being a racing game and a drifting game and a rally game all in one, but it was a very, very fun time. I really, really enjoyed this one. I enjoyed it so much that I 100%ed it, and I really wanted to play more. Like, that's the thing. A lot of games are kind of like one and dones for me. I get to the credits and I go, I would like to play that maybe sometime in the future, but not again right away. Parking Garage Rally Circuit left me wanting more, and it's too bad that the multiplayer wasn't really sparse with people, and the track selection was admittedly a little low, but the amount of replay value that this one has with all the different rally cars that you use was astronomical for me. I really enjoyed going through each track, mastering them with each car, and then getting the best time possible. I felt like this game had some of the best racing gameplay that I've ever played. The drifting was so smooth and so nice to get like the boost afterwards if you do it right and you do it long enough. The various tracks that you go on were incredible. There was one that was, I think it's like a parking garage that is in Chicago where it's just a big spiral that goes up and down. And that was like the perfect place to race your vehicle. It was just so much fun to race around these tracks, drift around them, get through the checkpoints, keep your car going, beat the other racers who are ghost racers, but they if they beat you, obviously you lose. Getting the best scores, getting the gold times on them with all three of the different cars, just very, very fun. And this one went by really fast for me too because I was just having so much fun with it. It's almost a blur in my memory because I played it and it took me like a couple days to beat it, and I just was like left going like, wow, I could really use some more of that. I don't think there will ever be another racing game quite like this one that grabs me enough to put it on a top 10 list, which is why I really wanted to put this on my top 10 list, because it's a very strange thing for me to have a racing game of all things on my top 10 list. Even when Mario Kart 8 came out, or the deluxe version or whatever, I didn't want to put that on there. Even like there are so many games that are racing games that come out every year, and they just kind of feel the same as anything else that you've ever played. Parking Garage Rally Circuit really set a new standard for games like this, and it's just so satisfying. It's just such a satisfying game. I can't really say too much more about it, other than Try it out for yourself. I think that you will really enjoy it. Me, I'm a person who gets bored of racing games pretty quickly if they don't have a really fun, unique thing going on. And this one has it all. It has a banging soundtrack, it has a fun gameplay style, it's got great track and course designs, and it's got plenty of replayability to it. And it's a quick, easy jaunt. Well, not easy, but it's a quick, fast jaunt through each of these levels, and they don't overstay their welcome. And I think that each one has enough uniqueness to it that you're not going to be wanting for a different track, because they all feel pretty unique, and they have things that change as you go through each lap. I do wish that there were a couple more tracks for sure, and I do think that the Statue of Liberty map was a bit like underwhelming for a final map, but the rest of the game is perfection. So good, really enjoyable, really love this one. So check it out. I know there's a lot of people who go, "What's this game? I've never heard of it." Well, if you've listened to the podcast, you know that I was singing its praises a couple months ago, and I stuck with it. And I every time I think back to this game, I have very good memories. All right, let's race. Let's drift on over to number 6. It's another Crab's Treasure. That's right, for number 6. This was an indie gem this year that did not get any recognition at the Game Awards for whatever reason. This game took the world by storm when it came out, and it still is played a lot nowadays. Are there some issues with it? Yes, that's why it's a bit lower on the list than maybe you would have expected. A little bit of a glitchy experience. The camera got annoying a couple times, and I think that the later half of the game was a bit too easy, and maybe it was because my build just came together perfectly, or as many people have pointed out, the bosses for whatever reason don't hit as hard in the second half of the game, and that can cause for some easier encounters, some extended lifetime of your character. Obviously, things still can be a bit challenging, don't get me wrong, but the first half of the game was definitely more difficult to get through than the second half of the game. But this is one of those Souls-like games that has a unique spin on it, with you being Krill and wearing various things on your back as a shell, and you can use that shell to block attacks, parry attacks, have special abilities, etc., etc. There's a lot that you can do with the shells in the game, and there's so many to find and collect. This is one of those games this year that I went for the 100%, and I was very happy that I got done with that. I felt like the 100%, even though it was a bit taxing at times, was definitely worth it, especially because it was really fun to see all the different unique shells that they put into the game, all the way to an N64 cartridge and a Dark Souls inspired helmet to put on your back as well. There's 3 different shell types: a light, medium, and heavy. The heavier your shell, the slower that Krill is altogether. But I think that you can kind of choose what style you want based on how you usually play a Souls-like game. Now, this isn't your normal Souls-like game. It's a bit more upbeat and cheery at times. It does dive deep into some pretty crazy things. There's obviously some monster designs in here that are a bit frightening, I guess I would say, ranging from like bile-spewing blobfish to a spider crab that jumps out of its shell and sneak attacks you after you think the battle is done. Just a lot of really cool boss designs in here. Nothing reused too. Even though there was a boss or two that was more or less like a normal enemy beefed up, there was also a lot of very unique boss fights in here. Especially there was this one that was just like in a cage, and you had to hit the locks on the cage in order to beat the boss. Or there was like an electric eel that would use various devices like a hair dryer at one point and a vibrator at another point to do different attacks, and depending on what she was holding, you would kind of know how to counteract that. And then the final boss as well was a very epic showcase for the game, voiced by Michael Reeves. A very good performance by him. He really stepped up, and I think that he deserves to get more voice acting roles in the future. I think he did a great job. Also, there's plenty of different things you can put onto your shell in order to help you out. One of the biggest ones that I used was an anti-shocking one that negated any shock damage. So some of the boss fights or enemies that used electricity were just nullified because of that. There was also other ones for if you get hit. If your shell gets hit, your next attack does double damage, and I buffed that with also charge attacks do double damage, and I put a couple of those on my shell, so I became a tank that could just obliterate anything with a charge shot. Obviously, there were some bosses that were a bit quick and fast and able to dodge my charge attacks, but one hit usually meant death for most things, even the bosses, which, in the second half of the game, I did equate it, I did kind of put it down to like, okay, maybe my build is just too strong, but a lot of people were agreeing that it was a bit too easy in the second half. Pretty much after the pinball machine sinks, that's when people said like, yeah, it just kind of became a bit easier. Maybe the boss design wasn't as tight. I don't think that's what it was, but I do think that the bosses were in general a bit lighter in terms of like the punches that they throw, and they were a bit more predictable to fight against. Now, there was one surprise boss that came out of one of the shells that you use for a bonfire type thing. I thought that was a pretty nifty idea, kind of a unique idea. And other than that, everything else in the game was pretty solid. The adventure aspect, like running around the map and finding various things, new shells, new enemies, new upgrades and stuff like that. Money, of course, you need lots of plastic to upgrade your character and stuff, and buy all the various different things from the shops. Just a very fun adventure, a colorful adventure, good soundtrack, a decent story to it, good voice acting for the most part, and a very fun game, a very fun Souls-like. There's not too many Souls-likes out there that I would say are good for beginners, but this one, next to the Star Wars Jedi series, is definitely one that I can now recommend and be like, hey, that's a pretty good one to kind of get you started. Even though it does utilize a lot of what the Souls-like genre does, it's in a more friendly version than what you expect from the more hardcore ones. So this is kind of going up there as like, yeah, maybe start with the Star Wars Jedi games and move on to maybe another Crab's Treasure after that, or maybe like Dark Souls, I don't know, 3 or Demon Souls or something like that. But this is definitely one of those Souls-likes that I will remember fondly. I don't know if I'd ever want to go through it again per se, but it was a very fun playthrough, a very nice time getting 100%. And I know that there's a lot of people out there who played this game who maybe they don't really like Souls-likes, or maybe they were attracted by the cute and cuddly characters and stuff like that. I think they all came out of it really enjoying the game, which is great. And congratulations to anyone who got to the end of the game. I mean, even though it's an easier Souls-like in general, it's still a pretty big accomplishment to beat that final boss and see those credits roll. So good work. Congratulations. Let's move on to number 5. From an easier Souls-like to one of the most hardcore Souls-likes that I have played in my life and finished. Frog Monster at number 5 was a really wild ride. Sure, maybe it doesn't look the best, maybe the graphics aren't your cup of tea, but this is a very, very interesting first-person shooter Souls-like where you take the reins as a frog created by a good wizard or whatever, and you need to hunt down the evil guy who's using his wand to make evil monsters out in the world, and you need to save the town from these evil monsters. And you start off with a revolver, and throughout the game you acquire different weapons like the shotgun and the machine gun and a bazooka and anything else that you can think of under the sun, including a bow and arrow. This game captured me right away because it is one of those unique Souls-like that comes out that just really has a fantastic boss design to it. Like, every single boss was just so meticulously designed and so well done. And the other thing, too, is that this is one of those Souls-like games that it's gonna really kick your ass at every corner. You're gonna die in this game, okay? There's no ifs, ands, or buts. This is the Helldivers 2 of Souls-like games. You're gonna die over and over and over again, and maybe even beat your head against the wall before you can finally enter into the gates that is beating a boss. But it's going to be so satisfying, and it's going to be one of those like memorable bosses that you go back and say, wow, that, even though I struggle with that boss was cool. Let me expand on that by, one of the bosses that I thought was the coolest boss in the game was a giant worm, and in order to defeat it, you had to actually go inside its mouth and do a gauntlet inside its body, shooting various organs, and then come out the other end and do it again. And it's like random every single time that you go inside the boss's body. It was really, really cool. There's another one that is like electrified, and there's platforms that you platform off of, and he follows you around, and every platform that he touches is electrified next to you. So it was a very intense hopping around to the different areas. There was another boss where you were underwater, and it was like you beat the boss, which was like a piranha looking kind of thing, and it sinks to the bottom of the area, and you're like, oh, I need to go collect my stuff from it. So you go down there, and these creatures that are like bottom feeders, they have taken over the fish's body and are using their own abilities inside of the fish's body, and you got to beat them kind of one by one by shooting each part. It was very, very cool. I mean, the bosses in this game are out of this world. So unique, so fresh, so imaginative. And to think that this is like an indie game that's going to probably be swept under the rug. Yes, it got some attention by some bigger Souls-like YouTubers like Iron Pineapple, but this is a game that really deserves more love. Like, yes, is it difficult? Yes, of course, it's difficult, but I think that a lot of people will enjoy it simply because it's a Souls-like game with guns. And who doesn't love a Souls-like games with guns? Remnant did it well, and this game also does it well. This one being a first-person shooter, of course, Remnant being a third-person shooter. And by golly, the soundtrack is awesome in this one. There's actually some comedic beats in this game as well. Like, there's a character named Supo who just kind of like shows up, and he's like, hey, I'm here and I want to be a boss too. And so you beat the boss, and Supo's like, well, that was fun. I'm sorry I attacked you. And usually he'll give you something good. And eventually down the road, when you're fighting the Ornstein and Smough of this game, he actually will help you if you haven't, done the dirty deed on. You haven't shot him and killed him because you've been annoyed with him. So there's also some pretty fun side characters as well in this game who help you out and do things with you. The game was a bit confusing to navigate. It does have Metroidvania elements in this like open world, so I did find myself becoming a bit lost at times and just kind of running around for what felt like hours. I know it wasn't really hours, but it really did feel like a very long time before I finally went, oh, there's a crack in this wall that I can shoot with my bazooka. Let's do that. And then you enter into a new area and you're like, finally, thank God. So I think it needed maybe a little bit of direction, like a character who's like, oh, did you try going to this area and searching around there or something? Like just a kind of a general point in the right direction, because there was a lot of times where I would go somewhere, but it wouldn't be the main path. So I would just run into a dead end. Maybe I would fight a side boss, which obviously side bosses are great. I mean, the side bosses were also very good. There was one side boss that was like a tree, and he had different fruit, and when he shot the fruit at you, they did different things. I thought that was pretty cool. There was also another side boss that was like a flying mosquito type thing who turned into like an airplane at one point, and he started doing like bombing runs. Pretty cool. But yeah, there was times where I would go through an entire section and run into a wall because it's like, well, this wasn't the actual way to go. This was just a side way. And eventually, when you do find the right way to go, then you can get back on track. But there was a couple times where I really, really wish that there was like just a way to just kind of nudge you in the right direction at times. Other than that, the game was great. It was hardcore as hell. I'm surprised that I got through the final boss, not as quickly as I did, but just kind of like as calmly as I did, because the final boss was very difficult. I did find his fight in the forest maybe a little bit more difficult, simply because it was like an enemy spam kind of situation, and it was very, it was very touching. What am I looking for? It was very tight, the area that you had to fight in. But in terms of like Souls like that I've played, especially this year and in years past, this is definitely a very good one. Obviously not as good as like your Dark Souls 3s or your Bloodborns or your Lies of P's, but it's definitely up there in being one of my favorite Souls like of nowadays. And this is one of those games that I definitely would, yes, I would go back through this one again. It was that good. The bosses were that good, and the gameplay was that good. So if you haven't checked out Frog Monster and you are a Souls fan and you enjoy more hardcore experiences, maybe check this game out and see if you got the guts to get through it. Also, a whole thing that I forgot to mention is there's bugs flying around, and because you're a frog, you eat bugs, and each bug has a different special, a unique thing that can happen. One can give you more ammo, one can give you health, one can make you jump higher, one can give you a wider area of reach with picking up items and ammo. So there's a lot of fun going on with that system as well, the bug system. And I would just recommend trying it out for yourself at this point. I can't really say much more. If I haven't already convinced you to buy it, maybe just check out some gameplay. You'll see what I'm talking about. Just check out that first or second boss fight. Very good stuff. All right, let's move on to number 4.
Faring in the ocean, far away from what I'd call home.
Steam World Heist 2 at number 4. That's right. One of my favorite soundtracks this year. Steam World Heist 2 took the stuff from Steam World Heist 1 and just kind of expanded on that. And what do you know? It also gave it like a bit of a pirate theme to it, a swashbuckling theme, if you might be so inclined to say. And this year, 2024 was the first time that I played and finished SteamWorld Heist 1, and I wanted to do that before this game came out. And that game quickly became one of my favorite SteamWorld games. For a long time, it was like, well, SteamWorld Quest was so good. I really loved that game. And then SteamWorld Heist was like, well, hey, I'm SteamWorld Heist. How you doing? And I was like, whoa, damn, this actually is really fun. And SteamWorld Heist 2 came out, and it's also very fun. They took that formula and kind of just expanded on it, adding in a whole open area for you to explore with the ship/submarine. Adding in new mechanics for each of your characters, so you can mix and match weapon types and mix and match perks and abilities that specific classes would get. Also, they added in a bunch more really fun robot companions. I really love the design of most of the robot shipmates that you got, and I also really enjoyed the main guy as well, who was very charismatic and a very fun dialogue. He had very fun dialogue. I thought the story was also very good in the game. Obviously, it goes the way of most SteamWorld games, where it's like, okay, first off, you start off with some crazy robots, and eventually it always kind of goes to the evil, like, they were there before the beginning of time type robots that you had to fight in pretty much every single SteamWorld game. Even SteamWorld Build had the evil robots that were deep within the ground that you had to deal with. So it does go the same way as that one, but I think that the design of the ultra super evil robots was very good. I also really enjoyed how they switched things up at the end of the game by having you almost be exclusively in submarine mode, which you did not have to be in throughout most of the game. Yeah, most of the game is pretty jovial, but that final section is pretty intense. It's pretty intense indeed. I love the music in this game. Steam Powered Giraffe did the soundtrack again for this one, much like they did for the original SteamWorld Heist, and they cooked. They really cooked. The main theme is so good, along with all the other themes in the game as well. They even make an appearance in the game multiple times, and they play the music in the game. And when you beat a boss or whatever, their songs come up, and it's always like this really fun moment, because it's like I really love Steam Powered Giraffe. I think they're probably one of my favorite bands, probably in the top like 5 or so at this point. And they keep putting out banger after banger, and I wish that they had got more SteamWorld games, because I think their style is kind of perfect for these games in general. And obviously with them being like Steam robots, robots that are like steampunk robots, it definitely makes sense. But yeah, just a very fun game, turn-based combat, having to aim your guns and work out how to hit the critical point on this character or this enemy, or how to destroy the most robots in one shot, and line up things so that your robots aren't in trouble if if you don't exactly get your shot, working together with the other robots to take them out, and combining the different perks to also help take out the various enemies as well. Just a very, very good time, really enjoyable, just all around fun time. And I definitely would recommend this for anyone who's a fan of like turn-based combat games, strategy games. It's definitely up there in my list. And would I say that that's a better game than SteamWorld Quest? Yeah, I think it kind of is, even though I gave them both a 4.5 out of 5, and even though I gave SteamWorld Quest my game of the year that came out, this one I think is better. But that just tells you just how good the top 3 games are on my list. If SteamWorld Heist is beating a past game of the year game, in my opinion, let's go ahead and see what came in at number 3. That's right, it's Balatro. Who else? Who else but Jimbo would be on the number 3 slot here? Balatro is a game that I, once again, instantly fell in love with. It's a card-based game where you play poker hands in order to get past blinds, and the farther you go in the game, the higher the blind usually is, and the various negatives that they give you for the boss blinds can really mess you up at times, especially if you have a certain tactic in mind. Obviously, it's very much a luck-based card game, very much a luck-based roguelite deck builder kind of thing. And of course, you're restarting your deck building journey every time you start up the game and choose a new run. But there are ways to kind of manipulate it a little bit by playing certain hands. Sometimes certain jokers will pop up, and sometimes certain planet cards that level up your hands will also pop up as well. I really like the randomness factor to this. It can be a bit of a detriment. Sometimes you can just have the worst run ever over and over and over again, and then finally there's one that clicks. And when that run clicks and you get, 500,000 chips or 1,000,000 chips at the end of it, it's just one of those chef kiss moments, and it just really makes the entire thing worth it. I originally gave this game a 4.5 out of 5, but after the more recent outing of it that I did where I, had my perfect run, I decided it's definitely like a 5 out of 5 game. Like I love this game's art style. I love the way that they set it up. It's also made by one person, which is very impressive. The soundtrack is really nice. I know there's a couple people who maybe mute the soundtrack because it is, yeah, sure, it's the same song over and over, but goddamn, does that song cook? Like it's such a perfect song for this style of game. On top of all that, it's got the jokers, which give you special abilities, so you can have like all heart cards giving you a ×3 multiplier when they're scored, or you can have like straights and flushes can be done with 4 cards, which is very helpful. You can have like all cards are counted as face cards, and then you can combine it with another joker that's like all face cards give you $5 every time they're scored. There's so much going on here for such a simple concept of play poker hands, get chips, beat blinds. There's so much more going on than just that. And, when this game was nominated for Game of the Year at the Game Awards, a lot of people went, why is there a card game and a DLC nominated? Well, as soon as people played Balatro, they went, scratch that. I'm sorry. This is a great game. It is one of the best games this year. But why is that DLC still here, right? But I'm so glad that so many people got around to playing this game and realizing just how good the concept is. And it definitely would have been a #1 game any other year if the other 2 games on this list weren't above it. But it definitely was just it's still a very, very fun game. I'll probably be playing this on and off the entire next, 2025. So look out for that being on the Still Playing Awards on the next Ferret Awards. But yeah, this is just one of those games that it's very addictive. It's got endless replayability. Every run just feels different no matter what. And the various different decks you use, the various different strategies you can use, the various different jokers you can find, all the different planet cards, all the different arcane cards which can help you manipulate your deck, all the different cards you can add to your deck with special abilities like lucky cards and wild cards and etc. etc. It all comes together so well, so perfectly. And that's why Balatro is number 3. And if I'm praising Balatro so much, that must mean that the next 2 games are some of the best games that I've ever played. And you know what? You might be right. Let's move on to number 2. Yep, number 2 was Animal Well, and is Animal Well. This is also another game made by a single person, published by Video Game Donkey, his big mode company. This is his first published game, and it is quite the banger. Animal Well is a Metroidvania that is very unique from other Metroidvanias that you might have played in the past. It doesn't have a lot of direction. It doesn't have a lot of, hey, this is where you need to go. You just kind of get into the game, get your bubble wand, and figure it out. And it's a game that I thought that I wasn't going to like because of that simple thing right there. I mean, I stopped playing Super Metroid because I got so lost I didn't know what to do, and I felt really bad about that. But Animal Well, it never really became a frustrating thing to be lost, because every way you go, there is there is something to do. And a lot of times you can just kind of run into a corner and be like, okay, yeah, I need to come back with something else here. But most of the time you go to an area and you immediately go, oh, I need this here, or oh, I can do this instead of this, or I can kind of figure this out. The bubble wand was such a game changer early on, allowing you to blow a bubble, jump on the bubble, and jump off. The frisbee disc was also a very fun thing. You can actually throw it and jump on top of it to ride it. It's a very fun thing. There's also like a slinky that you can get that will turn on buttons for you. Those were some of my favorite puzzles in the game, was using the slinky. It's just such a good Metroidvania, and it's also got a very fun art style to it. It's got like that CRT filter over it. It's kind of like a very classic looking video game, but the soundtrack and the graphics do wonders. They really work together so well to bring this game to the next level. There are some very intense moments throughout this game. There's some very fun moments throughout this game. There's some confusing moments. There's some just bizarre moments. I mean, there's an entire room that is just like capybaras and it's shaped like a heart. Love that. There's so many different puzzles in this game, and there's a few different ways they can solve some of the puzzles as well. And even though, yeah, sure, sometimes you might get a little bit lost, I think it's always worth playing going through and kind of just sifting this one out. I would say don't use a guide for this one. No matter how lost you are, I think that figuring out yourself is the most satisfying thing in a game like this. And for the Metroidvania genre, this one just really skyrocketed. Like, it is such a good game, and I do feel like Animal Wells should have won over Balatro in terms of best new IP or new indie game. Coming from this person, Balatro definitely deserved like the indie game of the year. But for me personally, Animal Well just kind of dominated over it, because it is obviously Balatro is a bit more like, okay, we gotta play cards. Animal Well has a bit more going on, of course. That's not to say that Balatro is bad by any means. I mean, it's number 3 on this list, but goddamn, when I played Animal Well and I got through that game, I was so happy, and I had found a lot of the eggs, and I had searched a lot of nooks and crannies, and by the time that I was done with it, I was very satisfied, and I was almost ready to go through it again. Like, I had booted up like I don't think it's like a New Game Plus, but you can kind of go through the game again. And I was very close to doing that, because I really enjoyed getting through all those puzzles and doing all the different various things you need to do for this Metroidvania. But in the end, I was like, well, it's a little bit too fresh in my mind. I would like to come back to it when I kind of forget. Like, I forget how to do things. And I think that would be another fantastic experience, because going into this one blind and going through the entire thing blind was such a mesmerizing and amazing time. So Animal Well definitely deserved that number 2 slot. Very fun, very good Metroidvania. And if you haven't played it and you're a Metroidvania fan, what are you waiting for? But there's one game that dominated over all the other ones, and I think you all know what's coming. What's number 1?
Okay.
course, number one is Astrobot. I don't think there's any other game this year that I gushed over quite like Astrobot. And a lot of people gushed over it. And this is one of the only times ever in my time playing video games that the number one game at the Game Awards and my number one game were linked up. They were synced. It's one of those rare years that everyone kind of equally agreed. Like, yeah, Astrobot definitely deserved that win, and Astrobot is definitely the best game that came out this year, hands down. This was a year where I liked a shorter experience, and once again, as I've said before, my new goal is to play some longer games this year, obviously. But Astrobot came out at the perfect time. I was kind of feeling a bit like lost in my gaming journey this year, and Astrobot came out and said, hey, it's okay, champ. Let's just play a platformer for a bit. And play a platformer I did. 20 hours in, I had the Platinum Trophy. I did all of the time trials, and I did the holiday-themed level, and I said, yes, this is the game of the year. Even before the time trial levels and the holiday level came out, I said, yes, this is the game of the year because it's just such a package of fun. It is just it's just such a bombastic experience from start to finish. Playing as Astrobot, finding all the other bots, going through each level, getting all the different like special abilities that are pretty unique for this game, and also on top of that, like having some really incredible boss fights as well. Like there's some boss fights in there that are just so crazy and cool and amazing, and they did such a great job with that. The other thing that they did a great job with was level variety. Like every level just has its own vibe. Even levels that have a similar art like style, like you're going through the mushroom cave again, have completely different things to do and different abilities to use throughout them. Most levels are kind of like you start off and maybe you get the special ability right away, or maybe you kind of go through a bit of the level before getting the special ability, but they really do hone in and focus on that special ability when it comes around, or they do try to make a very unique experience. Like the game starts off and you're just kind of like in awe of like the graphics and like what's happening, and they make that first level be so just kind of like chill, and like you go through it and you're just kind of getting into it and you're like, wow, this is so amazing. And they wanted you to play that first level and be like, okay, the amazement is over, let's get to the game. And they give you those frog boxing gloves where you punch with the frogs and you punch things, right? And they give you the like one where you like inflate yourself and you can fly up into the air and use the air to boost yourself around. And then they give you the ability that is like the dog. He gets on your back and he's like a rocket booster, and he boosts you around and through enemies and through walls and onto bumper pads. And then they give you the ability that stops time or slows down time. And then they give you the ability that lets you shrink down and come back into be big size. Like that level was one of the best levels, not only because it had a Katamari Damacy bot in it, but also because it was just a very fun and crazy game. Like I have never seen a game do Big Little Town as good as Astrobot did. There are other abilities as well that I haven't even talked about that are also very good, like the rocket chicken, or the little like elephant that sucks up goop and allows you to make new platforms, or the symbol monkey one. And there's so many levels that are based around these different things, but then there's also other levels that are more basic where it's like, hey, just have a fun time platforming through this one. Or there's a little bit of a gimmick here where you are on ice or whatever, or you're underwater and you're swimming around with a little penguin guy. Like just so many good levels in here. I don't think there was one level that I was like, oh, that's bad. No, all the levels were bangers. Even the side mission levels, where it's like only a couple, like you gotta beat this group of enemies, or you gotta go through this little tiny gauntlet, or whatever. Like those levels are also very good too. And of course, like I already said, the boss fights are out of this world. They're so good, and they lead to some of the best levels in this game, where they're based around old and new Sony IPs. You start off with an Ape Escape themed level, and you capture the Ape Escape disguised bots. And then the next one is like the God of War one, where you pick up Kratos' axe and you go around like this God of War Ragnarok themed area. level. And then there's like a Loco Roco one where you're moving the world to move the astrobot around, and you do things that are very much themed to Loco Roco. And there's also a Horizon Zero Dawn one, of course, because that's like their big new IP. And I was hoping for more themed levels. Obviously there's like 6 or so for each boss fight. But I wasn't disappointed that there weren't more. I was just wanting more, much like Parking Garage Rally Circuit or any of these other games that I really enjoyed. You want it to leave you wanting more, and more we have gotten in terms of like the speed run levels, which I really enjoyed the first one. The rest of them were kind of like mediocre at best, but I like that they gave you all this new content, all these new bots to save, in this nice speedrunner package. And then they give you another like bombastic holiday level that gives you even more bots, and it utilizes every single special ability that you can get in the game. It's just so cool. And I just loved finding all the different bots too, and just being surprised at what popped up. From Ghost of Tsushima bots to Katamari bots to Killzone bots to franchises that you never thought you would see in there. Like there's Castlevania ones in Gravity Rush, and there's a Fall Guy, and there's some really more niche things like Mr. Mosquito and Gex and Heavenly Sword and Ico and stuff like that. So there's so many different bosses to find, and there's also like animal themed bots as well, like Spyro the Dragon and the Last Guardian dude and Jumping Jack, Flash or whatever it's called. And there's so many of those things too where they're like Astrobot themed, but they're not like fully Astrobot, right? I also loved finding those as well. And there's like this gotcha machine where you get new items for each of the bots, and you unlock like a new little animation that they can do when you punch them. So you have Ken and Ryu fighting against each other, and if you punch them, they kind of like do their fight. Or you get like Crash Bandicoot, and he gets the Uka Uka, and you punch him, and he does like a dance, his little like end of level dance. Devil May Cry, you give him like his pistols, and he does like a combo on like a dummy in the air, and you can punch him and mess him up. There's a Yakuza, the main character of Yakuza. He's like standing in front of like a big sign, and you can punch him, and like items will fall out of his pockets. There's plenty more. I'm not going to spoil all of them, but one of my favorite ones though was the Katamari one, because the Katamari gets the big ball and tries to roll you up if you punch them, and that's actually a trophy in the game, is to get rolled up by the Katamari ball. So that was also very, very fun. And as you go through the game, you're getting more parts for the PS5, because that's like your main ship that you need to repair to take down the big bad guy who stole the mother chip for the PS5, and that's also a very bombastic ending as well to the game, where you fight the main boss. And then there's also a challenge at the end of it all. When you find all the bots, you can do like the last big challenge, which is actually a challenge, and it was very fun to do. And I was hoping for more levels to be added that are challenging like that one. Maybe we'll get that in the future this year. But for just the base game itself, without any of the added content, is already good enough to be Game of the Year. But now that they've added more things, more references, more bots, more blah, 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 it has solidified itself as being the Game of the Year this year, and my Game of the Year this year, and probably a lot of other people's Game of the Year as well. I think that it's just it's a very jovial experience. It's so much fun. Is it a bit basic? Sure, but what they do with that is amazing. It's incredible. How they built upon Astro's Playroom is beyond me. And if you haven't gotten the bots from Astro's Playroom, by the way, make sure you do that as well, just so you have all the bots in the game, because those ones are also pretty fun. They're not really represented in the Astrobot, because technically you find them in that game and they come to this one. But yeah, just a very, very excellent game all around. And I would not have it any other way. It was just such a fun time. Once again, it was a game that came out at the right time. It was the perfect length. It was the perfect amount of fun and the perfect amount of nostalgia bait as well. And sure, am I a little bit sad that like they reference all these characters and you might not get another game for them? Sure, maybe that is a little sad, but I think that it's more fun that they are referencing these characters and maybe generating some interest in them too, because like a kid who was born, I don't know, in 2015 or whatever, They haven't played a Killzone game. They haven't played they haven't played a Mr. Mosquito, like there's so many games that they could be, could miss out on. And then maybe this game was like, hey, this is a character from, this is Croc, and there's a new Croc game coming out. So maybe I'll try out that Croc game because he's in this game, something like that. So it's also a game where I think that it could inspire Sony to bring back some of those old IPs, because people go, oh my God, Sly Cooper's in this. I love Sly Cooper games. And Sony goes, oh, you did? They probably already know that, but still, you did, huh? So I think this year was pretty obvious what my game of the year was going to be. But what's your game of the year? Leave a comment below and or in my Discord. Let me know what your favorite game of the year was. I'm sure a lot of people's game of the year was Astro Bot. It's not. It was the best game this year by far. But there's other games that came out as well. So let me know what you think. What your favorite game was this year. And thank you so much for listening to this and watching this. I know that these go on for a little bit longer than most people like to, because they like a more condensed and concise video. But that's just not how I roll. I love to gush about my favorite games, and that's just how it goes. So once again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching and listening all throughout 2024. And let's move into 2025 for a new slate of games and a new top 10 list next year. I'll see you then. I'm Yemmy the Ferret, and I'm out of here. So long. The Ferret 64 podcast is owned and edited by Yemmy the Ferret. Small sound clips used throughout the podcast were made by Yemmy the Ferret. The song in the intro and outro is Nightshade by Adhesive Wombat. The Ferret 64 logo was made by Player2P2. News sources include PushSquare.com, NintendoLife.com, and PureXbox.com. All opinions, video game related, are my own. Thank you for listening.